it's almost like anger, if you could imagine it, almost like seeing a color or hearing a sound. You feel an emotion, right? It's that you don't have to like it. You know, you can reject that. You can move on. But yeah, basically every thought is a gift to accept or reject. Oh, okay. So yeah, I said I was going to get to this. I'm going to get to it right now. All right. So when we're young, when we're growing up until we're about like 8 years old, we're sponges, and we can't filter. Our critical thinking has not evolved to the point where we can go, oh, that adult is lying to me. Or maybe this idea isn't in my best interest. Basically, we're being programmed. We're being programmed by our environment. We're being programmed by our parents, by our schools, by our religion, by everything. Because that's just what's happening. We are born in the dark, screaming without a single spark of knowledge, and we learn as we go. And all we can learn is from our environment. And our environment teaches us certain things. And we are down here in this whole fight or flight, the world is a dangerous place, and we are learning to survive it, right? And so sometimes we learn bad habits because we maybe grow up with way too much fear. Maybe we're terrified all the time, and so now we're scared even when we shouldn't be. You know, everybody knows what I'm talking about when we get to this. But the idea is, when we're looking at the conscious, the unconscious mind, really we're dealing with a pretty unbalanced territory as far as certain things are concerned. I've seen different models. You know, I've seen people do this as much as 90-10 or so on. But the one that I liked was like 12-88, right? 12% of what we do, what we say, what happens to us, the decisions that we make are based on the conscious mind. The rest, we're following our programming. Like, for instance, just think about your habits, right? You don't have to think about tying your shoe. Done it a million times. You know how to tie your shoe. You don't think about it. Conscious mind is not engaged in tying your shoe. Your habits are. Same thing goes for addictions, and I can certainly attest to that as well. I understand, you know, craving for a cigarette is not a conscious, it's an unconscious trigger. There's other things like that too, but this ends up being sort of the dynamic or the secret to understanding some of these dynamics, right? The idea is the more you take ownership, the more you can start reprogramming this. And that is actually one of the goals of magic, that we attempt to reprogram things that no longer serve us through what essentially could, you know, at one point of view, you could consider it hypnotic suggestion. Because it is absolutely a hypnotic suggestion. Because it's all communicating with the unconscious. The unconscious is the voice and the impetus for what we would consider magical manifestation in the first place. So what does this mean, and what does this start doing for us? This is where we get to the idea, or the concept, right, of the ego. Everyone's heard of this, the ego. What is the ego? The idea of the ego is it is the self that you have adopted to participate in society, but it is not necessarily you, or the true you, or the full you, right? There are all kinds of things that your ego, which we would also consider a lot of these triggers, right? The programming from your youth, that decide what you consider to be acceptable behavior, or more to the point, what you do regardless of what you think. And, you know, we can use like a good old-fashioned sort of Venn diagram for, like, let's say that's society, right? And over here, that's you. Now, there's a nice big chunk of you. It blends right nicely with society, right? You fit right in. But then there's all these other parts of you. Maybe you're, I don't know, have certain proclivities that are frowned upon by your social group, or maybe you have a taste in music that all of your friends would think is horrible, or maybe it's something terrible. Like, there's all kinds of stuff. But that's what when we talk about the shadow self, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a part of you that doesn't fit, but still you. This is what we're looking to do. We're looking to not care about that. We're looking to unite the different parts of ourselves into one true will, right? Okay. Speaking of which, that's true will, right? So to find and to do your true will, which, as I kind of said before, you can consider it sort of the unity of all desire. Now, obviously, what happens when you have conflicting desires, right? Now, we'll get into some of the conflicts as we go on, but the idea is that if you can resolve the stuff that doesn't work for you anymore, then what's left should be in collusion with itself, right? In cahoots with yourself, right? You're no longer working against yourself, and I think everybody knows that feeling, right? To be your own worst enemy. Okay. So, the final thing we'll talk about when we're talking about mentalism is the idea as we go on, because the thing that this is to help you relax about some of this a little bit, because when we start talking about things like gods and angels and demons and spirits and elementals and all that kind of stuff, which is all in here in one way or another, lots of people get really, really wigged out, really, really scared, especially when you start talking about, working with darker forces or whatever, which I'm not advocating and we're not really getting into today, but, do what thou wilt. The idea, though, is regardless of the configuration or whatever spirits you might be working with, invoking, evoking, regardless, the magician is always at the top of the pyramid. Everything begins in the mind, remember? So everything is filtered through you. The idea, all right, so what's a great way to say this? You guys familiar with Alejandro Jodorowsky? One of my heroes. He sort of started the art house movement in the 70s with El Topo and Holy Mountain. I actually learned through his stuff from comics because I love his Meta Baron's work and all this kind of other stuff. But he's also, I'm not sure 100%, but I suspect he's a practicing magician. And regardless, he works a lot of magical stuff into his work. So I read a lot of what he has to say, and one of my favorite quotes that I think he's re-quoting, to tell you the truth, he probably learned it from someone else. The idea is like, okay, if you are meditating and the devil appears, make the devil meditate. That makes sense? Right? Top of the pyramid. Shut up. I'm doing the work. Right? Or whatever. Okay, cool. Make sense? Okay, cool. So we've moved past mentalism. Now we're getting to the second Hermetic principle. And this one you will struggle over for the rest of your days, but it's one of my favorites. Number 2 is polarity. And we can't talk about polarity without actually talking about both Sephiroth at the same time. So we've got here, we've got Chokmah, which means wisdom. And over here, we have Binah, which means understanding. Okay. But, as I said before, so before we move on, we should talk about this dynamic slightly. Now, lots of you will recognize this from all kinds of different schools of thought. This is the Trinity. Father, Son, and Spirit, Mother, Maiden, Crone, any of your sort of triform, deity configurations can refer to this triangle, as well as, on the back of the dollar bill, the, pyramid. That's this too, and that's why that capstone is separated. It's because of the abyss. We'll get there in a second. All right. So, So actually, to clarify then, so what is the abyss? And what does that have to do with the rest of it there? So what we'll consider for the abyss is it is the difference between the idealized and the actual, right? The difference between your idea for your master plan and how your master plan panned out, right? So God and his what we call these three the supernals, and the idea is that it's sort of they're just in the Platonic realm of ideas, right? That like we can look at this and we can call it a table, but that somewhere up there is the table by which all other tables are measured, right? The perfect table, God's table. I don't know. Right, that kind of idea, the ideal versus the actual. Okay, so and just point. Some people, and I do, I like it. Some people put another Sephiroth here, an 11th one, which is called Da'ath, which means gnosis, or sort of the divine knowledge. That's where we get the word, Gnostic from gnosis. Okay, but getting back to this, within this dynamic also, you can see, like for instance, the creation story in Genesis. God created the heavens and the earth was form and void, or without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And God said, "Let there be light!" And there was light. And God divided the light from the darkness. And the light called day, the dark called night. And the light was good. Right? That's this story. It's also the Eden, sort of the idealized versus the actual, the Garden of Eden, that kind of idea. But the idea of really what we want to focus on, as far as our concepts are concerned, are the pillars, right? So we've got this pillar, the black pillar, the left pillar, the pillar of severity. And we have the right pillar, the white pillar, the pillar of mercy. Okay. Boaz and Joshua, but we'll just call them severity and mercy for your purposes. And then we've got the middle pillar, my favorite pillar, personally. Middle pillar, which is sometimes called the pillar of mildness. It's not my favorite one, but I like the middle pillar. You could also call it the Tao, like T-A-O, like in the sense of like the yin-yang of Taoism is that which does not, that which bends will not break. It's the middle between the extremes, right? Now these are I'm sorry?
The middle way?
Yes, the middle way. I would say really anybody who is trying to do light work with themselves is essentially going up the middle path anyway. We'll get there when we get lower. But this here we can see. All right, so really, what's important is that understanding this polarity, the polarity of these extremes. Now, these are the most extreme of the extremes. Of all the extremes, these are it, right? This is, you could consider this the wild, abandoned, creative energy of Pan that just big banged into the universe, right? That's the explosion, the first crack of the lightning bolt, versus Binah. Now, this is where we're going to get, this is the light and the dark dynamic. And this is also where we get into the ideas of Black and White Magick. The idea being, okay, so the best way to describe this, and I want to make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Okay, actually, we talked about the relationship of the triangle. This is sometimes called the triangle of manifestation, where you have how do you describe this? Okay, so it's like you have knowledge, you have the knower, and you have that which knows, right? So, wisdom versus understanding, right? Wisdom might say, I should or shouldn't commit a crime. Understanding understands why you did. Does that make sense? Right, she is, all right, so what we'll do, and while I don't quite want to get ahead of myself, because, as I said, everything is sort of an aggregate of what came before it, it is important that we talk about Saturn, who is the planet that rules this Sephiroth. Now, I want to just make sure that I'm not getting ahead of myself before I get into this next part. Okay, so, yeah, the knowledge. All right, so if you're not the one, you're not the one and you're something else, right? If you're something else, which our highest of our highest of our highest soul, right, would like reside in Chokmah. In theory, that's where the magician's trying to get, where it's just you and God, and nobody, nothing, no intermediaries, nothing in between. You manage to rise up the tree. If you're not God, then you are trapped between the poles of severity and mercy. We're all trapped. We're all trapped in this binary universe. Because remember, we're going aggregation. So at its core, there's a singularity. But there's also a binary aspect to it. We know this when we look at computers, zeros and ones, right? 0, 1, 0, 1. So when we talk about the extent of light, there is the ultimate dynamic, right? Of that which penetrates and that which is penetrated, right? And that does give you gender, and that also gives you violence, and it gives you other things, right? But the idea is that there is that which goes and that which is gone into. That which is light and that which is not light, which is darkness. Darkness is nothing but the absence of light. Darkness is, when we had Ein Sof Or, right? Darkness is nothing but the absence of light. And that's what we're understanding the saturnal aspects of this in the yin-yang sense. All right, so rather than skipping ahead, I'm just going to get to it now. So one of the best ways I find, that I like, that the Thelemites use is the god forms of Hadit and Nuit. Okay, so Hadit sometimes is depicted like a winged golden egg. Sometimes there's like a serpent wrapped around it, or what have you. And then Nuit, you would see sort of in Egyptian art, she's sort of the queen of the sky. You see her sometimes bent over the scene, and she's covered in stars. That's the stooping starlight. We put Nuit here in the sense that, again, don't get your hackles up, but the idea of the divine harlot, right? That she who refuses no one, right? Pure understanding, denying none, all come unto me. That sense of Nuit, where Hadit is the, okay, also in Thelema they say every man and every woman is a star. In that every man and every woman is an aggregate of experience, right? You might even include reincarnation in that whole karmic dynamic, but the idea is that you are a lot of experience that you've had from birth to now, to presumably death and what have you. So the idea of Hadit and Nuit, they represent, and everyone will recognize this, the dot in the circle. This is the hydrogen atom. This is the shape of the galaxy. This presumably may even be the shape of our souls for all we know. But the idea that there is, okay, so think about it this way. In an infinite universe, no matter where you stand, you're in the middle. Right? No matter where you stand, you are in the middle of the circle of your experience, your influence, your concept, right? Because consciousness is non-local too, so it's only the edge of your imagination. But the edge is all about Saturn. Saturn is all about the edge. He is the circle. He is that everything is bound inside of. When a magician casts a circle, the idea is it's casting the edge of your experience, your influence, right? So the dynamic between Hadit and Nuit is that idea of the one being the single experience, the single soul, versus the universe that he's in, right? That dynamic. Okay. Now we'll get a little more when we get into some of the solar stuff, but that's really the key. So now what we want to focus on is the idea of sort of the conscious versus the unconscious mind. And essentially what we're trying to do is use that as a vehicle for sending instructions to our higher self, right? Who knows what's best for us and intercedes on our behalf. And we'll get into the HGA a little bit as well. But really, how best to explain this? All right, so think about it this way. Everybody is playing the frame game, right? The idea that I have a concept of the world. Things that I believe that are true, things that I believe aren't. And as I go forth in the world and I bump into other people with different opinions and we clash on them, it's like really deep down in my heart, like I want to change your mind. I want you to agree with my version of the world. And why would that matter? Why does it really matter? Why should I care? You would think that you shouldn't. But what we know is because it is our unconscious mind that is the vehicle for basically the cause and effect that we would basically say manifests in a magical way. The idea is that what we focus on is incredibly important. Where attention goes, energy flows. So the more food, energy you give a thought form, the more power it has. And that's why magicians long, long ago learned the value of group work, getting together in a group. Because every time, like some guy, what was it, Donald Michael Craig had a chart that was in his Modern Magic book, where he's like, one magician can produce like 1 E of energy, 2 magicians can produce 2 E's of energy, 3 can do 4, 4 can do 8, 8 can do 16, and so on and so on. So when we get a group of like 12 people together, we can do some pretty incredible stuff if we're all of like mind with the same intention. Because that's the thing. And again, because we're sharing these astral spaces, in theory, the more entangled or sympathetic our work and our thoughts become with one another, the more we manifest that same result. We're sharing this reality. And we'll get into a little bit more about multiple worlds and that kind of stuff as we go on. But getting back to that whole that which penetrates versus that which is penetrated, it's sort of the essence of the difference between black and white magic, right? So in the most general way, you would say white magic is all about doing work on yourself, your energetic body, getting your ego out of your own way, overcoming your failings, and so on and so on. Black magic is something that you would do on somebody else that's not you. Anything that you do on somebody else that's not you. So, like, for instance, if we get together and we pray for somebody's healing, technically we're doing black magic. Because we're not healing me, we're healing someone else. Which is why now we call that gray magic, right? Some people get in there and they're like, no, that's gray magic, right? Because we're doing it for somebody else, but we're doing it with, with positive intention. And that's probably what, if you were going to call me something, you might call me that. Because I do stuff for other people, and I try not to get a little too hung up on, because we're all caught between the poles, right? So I try not to get too hung up because I know, that's right. That's what I wanted to say before. The resolution of those poles. Okay, so everybody knows, what is God, right? God is love, right? That's generally, universally compared when we think about God. God is love. And love is the power that resolves paradox, right? Love is the thing that unites opposites and makes them something new, right? So the way that things rise up the tree of life is through love. And they continue to basically resolve their perceived paradox between the poles. Am I losing you guys? You with me on that? Okay. So, yeah. So love being, and then that's why, for instance, when we were talking about Thelema and Will, That's why the Thelemites will say 93 to one another. That's a long thing. But basically the idea is that the Greek word thelema, which means will, and the Greek word agape, which means universal love, have the same numerical value. The idea being that God's will is love and love is will, and you doing your true will is doing God's will and being an expression of that love. Does that all make sense? Okay, cool. So that's the idea why, why those things get smashed together, because things eventually resolve themselves, right, as they start to come back together as we are in the process of separating. Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So
basically, love is the reconciling force.
That is right. Love is the universal force. Love came down. Love goes up. Comes back up. It's all one big circuit, right? Everything has an input and an output, and everything eventually returns to source. And that's the wheel of karma, right? That's the wheel of karma. You get what you put out, or you get back what you put out there, right? So we are kind of covering some of Saturn, right? This is important because as we continue to go now, we'll be going below the abyss. Saturn is always the edge, right? The edge of the circle, the edge of the universe, the edge. Anything that binds, anything that controls, anything that's a law or a rule that you can't break. The judge kind of explains why judges wear black. Black is Saturn's color. Ultimately, not to sound like an apologist or what have you, but I think that Saturn gets a really bad rap. I think he is cast far too often as because he is the adversary. That's his job, right? But he gets cast way too much in in my opinion, ridiculous, satanic, because that's right. That's where we get that word. Saturn, Satan, right? That's where it comes from, right? Now, rather than us getting all wigged out about Satan, why we think about him like the number 3, right? You gotta have the number 3. You want to keep going, right? He's the so I think about it this way, right? Without obstacles, there would be nothing to succeed against, right? There would be nothing to do here because everything would be effortless. And that's for up here. We're not effortless down here. It's a struggle. It's a struggle, right? So regardless, all right.
All right, so if the pool represents number 1, we're halfway to number 2.
Oh, okay. So sorry. Those numbers, his numbers, relate to the the 22 cards of the higher arcana. So don't worry about that. If we were going to put that 0 anywhere, we would either put it here in Da'ath, or we would make Da'ath 11, and we would put that 0 up there, right? Okay.